enjoy the benefits of sex, but he doesn't have to go through this whole 9-month gestation period. So in transhumanism, there are some very exotic ideas such as post-genderism, the idea that we will be able to develop androgynous beings, morphological beings, who will take the best of what it means to be a man and the best of what it means to be a woman and actually have a new form of life that is both man and woman, who can enjoy the benefits of things such as sex, which I mentioned a moment ago, but without the burden of having to become pregnant, having to carry a child for 9 months. And so if you look into some of their ideas, where do babies come from? Don't these future humans want to have genetic offspring? And they've developed ideas around how all this could be done within their science. You take genetic samples, and this isn't altogether cloning, but you take genetic samples from the contributors, man, woman A, and man, woman B, or future marriages may be made up of multiple numbers. Maybe there's 18 or 20 that have entered into what we would then think of as a marriage contract. And those ones that want genetic offspring can all provide samples of their genetics. And then this is taken to a specialized pregnancy center or birthing center of the future. And through some form of super in vitro fertilization, those genetic samples are placed inside of an egg which has had its nucleus removed, which is also probably donated from one of these women. It is treated with chemicals or with electricity like we do with cloning now. And it jumpstarts spindle formation, cells begin to divide, and a new man-woman made up of multiple partners begins to grow and becomes an embryo. And if that sounds incredible to you, in Britain just this week, the first baby from 3 parents was born. The science has already been perfected. We're already doing it. It's not as if this is as futuristic as it may sound. We're at the beginning of the gate now, but we've come through the door. The gate is open, and we're walking through it, and we're moving that direction. And they're imagining how this science could be used in ways that, in their mind, is beneficial to humanity. We no longer have the burden of gender roles. Now, what do psychologists say about a baby? How a baby is bonded to its mother while it's growing up inside of its mother's womb is almost mystical. It's metaphysical. We don't understand it. A baby is born and even already knows the tone of its mother's voice. Well, transhumanists have an answer for that too. Postgenderists believe that they also take genetic samples from whichever of the men, women want to play the role of the traditional mother, and they grow a synthetic womb inside the birthing center, and it is hooked to an androidal system that also has the sound of the mother's voice recorded in it. And this androidal system can stand up, sit down, move around, make natural movements that feels very natural to the embryo that is growing up inside of it, so that by the time 9 months later, and even that is a question because these future humans may not take 9 months to gestate, but if they do, you go to the birthing center and the switch is thrown, the little baby is born, it's grown up inside its mother's womb because it was taken from her genetics and recreated in a laboratory. It has grown up listening to the sound of her voice and her heartbeat, all of which are a part of this future system. Did you know that some of the early discussions actually were around creating clones who would then be anesthetized, not even aware that they're alive, and their wombs would be used for gestating these children, and then afterward the clone, if not legally defined as a human, could be discarded. It would simply be a system for saving man, woman A from the burden of having to carry a child. But many of even within the transhumanist, philosophical community, simply couldn't tolerate that idea, and so they advanced it to growing a synthetic womb which could then be used for the gestation period. One of the other benefits that transhumanists imagine actually borderlines on the supernatural. And this started really with Nick Bostrom, who is a leading transhumanist in the world, sits on the IEET's board under Dr. James Hughes. Nick Bostrom actually earned his prestigious seat at Oxford University by writing his thesis on transhumanist values. And thankfully for the rest of us, Dr. Bostrom has been kind enough to post his theses and other works that he has done. So anybody who would want to follow up on this could go to nickbostrom.com, pull down the website on the left side and click on Transhumanist Values and go and read his original theses, which he wrote to earn his Ph.D. and his seat at Oxford University. It's interesting because Bostrom doesn't claim any kind of religious ideology, but he has diagrams in there that he uses when he gives his lectures at universities and also at the Transvision conferences, which are taking place every year now for about the past decade at leading law schools and universities around the world, in which the arguments are being detailed now, worked out among law scholars on how the laws and policy of our government will be extended to protect transhumans of the future and future democracy. But if you click on it and you look at some of the charts that he has created, for instance, he has one that's kind of a large rectangle. And in this rectangle, he describes this rectangle as representing all possible modes of perception, modalities, sensory modalities. Down in the corner, he draws a small circle, and he says this circle represents humans. The limits of our perception, modes of perception or sensory modalities, our eyesight, hearing, taste, feeling, and how far it extends into all possible modes of perception. Then around that, he draws a larger circle, and he says this is the animal kingdom. The animal kingdom not only has our level of perception, but other levels of perception. For instance, they can hear at higher decibels than we can. Dogs at 40,000 hertz, dolphins at something like 80,000 hertz. Some animals like bats can navigate using sonar. They also seem to be in touch with the earth somehow in ways that we're not. They can pick up vibrations. They'll begin to move out of particular areas when they know there's going to be an earthquake or there's going to be a volcano, and they'll begin to migrate to another area. And we're not exactly sure how they do that. They may be able to smell tumors. And if it's not smelling it, it's some other method by which sometimes they are aware that there is a tumorous cancer, something that is actually degrading your DNA. So he talks about these fascinating things, but then he says something that I think is of the most importance and borderlines the metaphysical. And that is when he points out that animals can also see into areas of the light spectrum that we cannot see into. And that is viewed in transhumanism as a future benefit, and even one of the causal reasons we would want to merge ourselves with the animal kingdom so that we can open these new modes of perception into realities that right now we are blinded to. Perhaps one of the reasons we would want to merge ourselves with animals so that we too would be able to do this. Why this is interesting to me as a Christian and as a researcher and as a scholar of biblical texts is because we know that animals can see into, at least some animals can see into, what we think of as the supernatural realm. And it isn't just extra biblical texts that seem to imply this, but even in the Bible. For instance, the story of Balaam's donkey. Balaam gets in trouble because he's prophesying against Israel, which he's been ordered, by God not to do. And so now he's on his donkey and he's going down the road. Well, the donkey can see something that Balaam cannot see. There's a large angel standing in the middle of the road with its sword drawn, and it's going to take off dumb Balaam's head. And Balaam doesn't know why the donkey keeps turning out of the way, and so he keeps kicking him to get him back on the road, and the donkey's trying to save his life. A great deal of extra biblical research has also been done that seems to show that animals sometimes are responding to something that we can't see. And in fact, probably the average person, at least at one time in their life, have saw their dog growling at something that isn't there as far as we can tell, or maybe even behaving in a way. You have a dog that's vicious, it's brave, it's not afraid of anything, and then all of a sudden a strange feeling comes over you and the dog senses it too, or the dog may even run and hide under the bed. So they seem to be reacting to something that we can't see with our eyes. And in the traditions and in the histories of the world, owls come, and owls serve with the goddess Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft. Other areas of witchcraft where cats are used as mediums through which we are communicating with the spirit world. That idea has been with humanity since forever, but what made it real to me, of course, is the depiction out of the Bible, at least in one illustration, where an animal can see something the humans cannot see. That is definitely in the back of the mind of many of these transhumanists. And they are bravely wanting to go where no modern man has gone before, in breaching that barrier that is between us and them. This is so true that now the Templeton Foundation, which has been funding an entire series of lectures over the last several years at the Arizona State University on transhumanism and the future of democracy, have played off of what Dr. Bostrom began talking about, and many of what the university students are now asking about. How do we separate our humanity? If we change ourselves physiologically, we enhance ourselves to humans 2.0, do we also change our soul? Do we change our spirit? Do we even have a spirit anymore? And as these questions are being entertained, Arizona State University began a brand new project. You can go to ASU's website and you can click on it. It's called the Sophia Project, the goddess of wisdom. The Sophia Project, some believe even to be that feminine aspect of God, right? And it describes exactly what the Sophia Project is about. It is to verify and or to make contact with, and then they describe it, the ghosts of dead humans, aliens, angels, demons, a universal conscious, God. They list all of it, the whole purpose behind the project, growing out of transhumanist conversations and debates and lectures being offered at the Arizona State University and funded by the Templeton Foundation. Want to take this whole question of altering ourselves as humans forward to this next giant question. By doing so, can we also now cross over? Can we start communicating with that unseen intelligence? So this too is viewed as a value among transhumans. Many of them are spiritual, and many of them see that as a benefit. While some of these exotic ideas in transhumanism, of course, where it may be being viewed by them as a benefit, may cause a lot of red flags to go up among other people who also are interested in things supernatural. There are some of the critics, of course, of transhumanism who believe that their worldview is a bit too positive, that they view this as being a utopian plan that's going to take us into the future. We're all going to live in a happy universe and have enhanced lives. But there are those who are also qualified to make criticisms based on the science itself and what it may portend to do. For instance, Dr. Kass was the chairman of the President's Council on Bioethics during the Bush administration. And here is a man who had the full review of the science, the best reports on the science, testimony from experts who were working in these fields of science and what they believed could actually develop out of transforming mankind. And after Dr. Kass had served on that seat with the government, he resigned, he wrote a book, and in the introduction to his book, Life, Liberty, and the Defense of Dignity, he wrote how that in laboratories around the world, scientists are now honing their skills, polishing their skills, looking forward to a post-human future, and that humanity is on the operating table, literally, scheduled for wholesale psychic and physiological redesign, while on the streets, the evangelists, he refers to them as, not transhumans, the evangelists are quietly selling their message, and that we are in a war for the mind of a generation. And Dr. Kass believes we're probably going to lose this war, but he says that anybody who cares about their humanity, the time is now for standing up and understanding where science is taking us and what it may portend for the future. He's not the only one. Professor Francis Fukuyama reviewed emerging fields of science, and then the philosophy of transhumanism. And he wrote a white paper on it in which he considered the combination of those two to probably be the most dangerous science and technological and philosophical concepts in the history of mankind, which he believes could very quickly lead to an extinction level event. The Birkbeck Law School in Britain is one of the most famous law schools on earth for teaching CSI students, crime scene investigators. And they put out a press release about 18 months ago now in which they said that they will need to design future classes for crime scene analysis which has been perpetrated by something that is only part human. The whole point was that everything we know about forensics, about profiling, might not apply if we're trying to track down a serial rapist who is part wolf, because he may have a bloodlust, he may have a difference, his mindset, his instincts, everything about him may not fit anything that we understand. And this is considered to be such a real possibility, by the way. It isn't just the Birkbeck Law School. This last year in California, a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing in the state of California that was chaired by Democrat Brad Sherman, who's actually best known for his expertise in the spread of nuclear arms among terrorists, chaired this meeting. A writer for Congressional Quarterly, Mark Stenzel, attended the meeting and came out of it flabbergasted, because what the meeting was all about is future terrorism conducted by transhumans. And he said that the entire hearing, a congressional hearing, he said sounded more like a pitch for a sci-fi movie than it did a sober discussion of scientific reality, because he said they were talking about superhumans, super intelligence, artificial intelligence, and super animals that could soon be on the battlefield or even in our neighborhoods for domestic reasons, a lethal force for which we are not prepared. The government is so concerned about where transhumanism may take us in this regard that they consider this now to be the fledgling start of a new arms race. In the way that in the past between the Soviet Union and the United States we were in an arms race over nuclear arms, transhumanism is the near future arms race, and it is considered to be of such importance that the top scientific mind at the Pentagon, the Jasons, J-A-S-O-N, that's the name of the top scientific minds at the Pentagon, put out a press release recently called Jasons Fear Brain-Modified Foes, in which they were talking about this technology in the hands of our enemies. And what they were saying was, we have to get at the forefront of this technology. See, this is how we're going to be forced into this. It's not a matter of whether we should or whether it's ethical. We have to do it, because if we don't, our enemies will, and then they're going to subjugate us to their will. And therefore, because of that, that's why DARPA and other branches of the U.S. military, and of course, SAPOC budgets, black budgets, things we don't know anything about. There are literally billions of dollars flowing now beyond congressional review into the development of super soldier technology and other forms of exotic technology as a result of even what the Jasons are talking about. So there is this other side of this transhuman utopianism that is very concerning to a lot of great minds. And I can tell you that even on the ground now, already, the parts that are already being played out are raising alarm bells. For instance, the related science of genetically modified foods. We are already finding out that by unnaturally crossing over species barriers and creating potatoes that have moth genes in them and other variations of foods, that these foods do things. They have unintended consequences. Tests that are being done now in Britain where they're raising fields of genetically modified crops, and downwind the populations are developing respiratory diseases that are unusual, that are starting to skyrocket. There have been suppressed scientific studies. Arpad Pusztai is one famous case. His studies were supported by another independent scientist by the name of Irina Ermakova, who was able to repeat what he did. What did he find? He took rats and he forced these rats to eat genetically modified foods. They began developing tumorous cancers. Their offspring came in at half weight and died at half life. This was all done in a laboratory setting which was immediately being suppressed by a giant corporation whose name I won't mention, but who literally stands to lose trillions of dollars in the future, and therefore they are highly motivated to suppress these findings. And only because of Greenpeace and some others who have been involved in lawsuits for over a decade to force these documents to be made available to the public are we just now being made aware of some of the things that are happening in the real world. One of the test studies showed that they would put rats in a cage and starve them. And then they would place genetically modified potatoes here and natural organic potatoes here. And when they open the cage doors, the rats will run to the organic product and they won't even eat the genetically modified crop unless they're starving and have no other options, and then they'll eat it. And you gotta wonder what God's little creatures know about these products that we don't know, but we very well could be opening a door to a molecular biological nightmare, to a crossover between humans and animals, or genetic foods that probably not for a decade will we really understand what the impact on our health is going to be with some of this genetic modification. But imagine now, extrapolate what we already are finding about genetically modified crops. And there are many other stories, by the way, that are now coming through into the news that show that genetically modified crops are leading to cancers in humans as well. But where are genetically modified crops? They're everywhere. They're in Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Genetically modified soy is in food products in every store in the United States of America. This bear has already come through the door and there's no putting it back. So now we're riding the bicycle while we build it. The human population is the guinea pig. We're already doing the science and we'll wait and see how it turns out in the future. But imagine when we now take that same approach to living sentient beings. And now we have genetically modified animals and genetically modified humans that are in the environment. And they are crossbreeding and interbreeding one with each other. Very quickly we could have a human form of mad cow disease. If you're sitting in a restaurant eating goat cheese that contains human DNA, we don't know what the impact of that is going to be on a human. We certainly know what it did to cows and the kinds of brain diseases that it created in them when they were eating their own DNA, when they were eating their own product. We just simply don't know. Prion contamination. Wired magazine recently wrote a special article called Farm Animals, P-H-A-R-M, Farm Animals Crank Out Drugs. And the article was a positive spin on developing pharmaceuticals in transgenic animals. What the public doesn't know is that the writer for Wired magazine contacted me first and wanted me to be part of that special series at Wired magazine because they had come across an article that I had written at WorldNet Daily, which was raising some cautions about, tinkering with God's plan. So the writer, Elizabeth Svoboda, contacted me. I like what you have to say. I want my article to be balanced for Wired magazine. Would you be willing to send me some issues, nutshell some issues that you believe should be, the cautionary side of this science? So I did. I sent it to Elizabeth Svoboda. About 3 weeks later, when the article was published by Wired magazine, nothing I had said made it into the article. It was all positive about farm animals, P-H-A-R-M. So I emailed Elizabeth and I said, well, I guess nothing I said got written into the article. She said, no, everything you said was in the article, and it got censored out by the editors at Wired magazine because they didn't want the public to be bothered by these issues. They wanted to put a positive spin on it. Well, then I went back and read the article, and I knew she was telling me the truth because there was a particular line that I had used in which I said we might want to be careful tinkering with God's plan. That's a very specific phrase. When I went back and read the article, I saw where a scientist by the name of Vandelevor said, now some people might say we shouldn't be tinkering with God's plan, but, she said, if we find a cure for cancer through a transgenic animal, we won't hear the public saying you shouldn't be doing that. I didn't do it, but I wanted to email Miss Vandelevor and say, have you watched the movie with Will Smith, I Am Legend? Because that is exactly the scenario with which that film opens. You have a molecular biologist or a geneticist sitting in front of a television on somebody's talk show saying, we have found the cure for cancer. How did they find the cure? They merged human and animal DNA because some animals are more resilient to cancer. And out of that, they created a vaccine. And they vaccinated all of the earth, and everybody celebrated that we have found the cure to cancer. Now the scene changes, and it's 2 or 3 years down the road, and almost all life on earth is dead. Why? The unintended consequence, a form of human rabies developed because something that was not natural to us now was bridged into our physiology by crossing over into the animal kingdom. And by the way, that is a very real scientific possibility, but it isn't stopping anybody. We're doing it anyway. So there definitely is two sides to this coin in terms of what transhumanists are aspiring to through the use of these new sciences: biotechnology, nanotechnology, neuropharmacology. They all have great ology names and ism names. But what they may do is lead us literally into the fulfillment of biblical prophecy.